animation in the 1980s entered its most volatile era. Studios and governments clashed over violence, politics, and sexuality drawn in ink. Films were banned, seized, and buried for decades. Some terrified audiences, others reshaped entire industries. These are the 10 animated movies from the 1980s that censors tried to erase, but history refused to forget. Coming in at number 10, we have Fire and Ice, the fantasy epic that tried to turn illustration into motion and triggered bans across Asia. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and painted by legendary fantasy artist Frank Frazetta, the film arrived in August 1983 through 20th Century Fox with a $1.2 million budget. It used a grueling rotoscope process that transformed live actors into oil-painted warriors and monsters. The story unfolds in a prehistoric world locked between fire and frost, where villages burn, blades clash, and heroes fight amid swirling smoke. Scenes of scantily clad warriors and explicit violence caught the attention of censors in Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines, who declared the film morally obscene. U.S. television networks refused to syndicate it, and the MPAA issued an R rating that cut it off from younger audiences. Critics described the dialogue as thin, but the visuals as extraordinary. Variety called it Frazetta in motion, praising its living painting aesthetic. The film earned around $760,000 in domestic revenue, but gained cult reverence among animators and illustrators. Its influence reached creators like Genndy Tartakovsky, who later cited it as inspiration for the brutal minimalism of Primal. At number 9, we have Heavy Metal, a film that electrified underground animation with its heavy guitars, intergalactic warlords, and unapologetic adult content. Produced by Ivan Reitman for $9.3 million, it adapted the French magazine Metal Hurlant into a series of connected sci-fi stories. More than 1,000 artists from Canada, Britain, and the United States worked on it, crafting 8 surreal chapters that combined nudity, gore, and fantasy adventure. The soundtrack roared with Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, and Sammy Hagar, giving it the pulse of a rock concert. Censors in Ireland, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa banned or restricted it for graphic eroticism, while Canadian television blocked airings for 15 years. Despite the resistance, Heavy Metal grossed $20.1 million in the United States and became an emblem of counterculture animation. Music rights disputes kept it buried for over a decade, but bootleg VHS copies circulated worldwide. A 1996 restoration revived it, and filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and Richard Linklater later cited it as proof that animation could exist entirely outside the boundaries of family entertainment. At number 8 is When the Wind Blows, a quiet film that turned the threat of nuclear war into an intimate tragedy. Directed by Jimmy Murakami and based on Raymond Briggs' 1982 graphic novel, it tells the story of Jim and Hilda Bloggs, an elderly British couple who follow outdated civil defense leaflets after a nuclear blast devastates their country. The £3 million production blended hand-drawn characters with miniature sets, creating an atmosphere of confinement that mirrored their slow descent into radiation sickness. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd composed the score, surrounding the couple's fading hope with somber, drifting melodies. The United Kingdom's Education Board removed the film from school programs in 1987 after complaints that it was emotionally scarring. German and French broadcasters cut sequences of radiation effects before airing. Its limited release brought in roughly £1 million, yet it received a BAFTA nomination for Best Animated Film. Anti-nuclear organizations adopted it as a rallying tool during the Cold War, and humanitarian researchers later used it in empathy studies. When the Wind Blows remains one of the few animated films that confronted the apocalypse through the eyes of ordinary people. Taking the number 7 spot is Rock and Rule, the Canadian experiment that turned animation into a demonic concert and nearly bankrupted its studio. Created by Nelvana with a ballooning $8 million Canadian budget, the film assembled a legendary voice cast that included Debbie Harry, Lou Reed, and Iggy Pop. The story takes place in a decayed, post-apocalyptic world where mutant musicians perform in nightclubs built from ruins, and a power-hungry rock star tries to summon a demon through amplified sound. MGM executives panicked after early screenings, ordering 12 minutes of cuts and replacing dialogue to tone down the religious symbolism. Brazil and Argentina banned it outright for satanic imagery. Despite its ambition, the film's theatrical run collapsed, earning less than $1 million before disappearing. VHS bootlegs and midnight screenings eventually resurrected it. Critics later called it a visionary hybrid of rock music and animation that predated the style MTV would make famous. Rock and Rule became a symbol of creative excess, remembered for its rotoscoped energy and its attempt to merge music rebellion with animated spectacle. Hit subscribe before we enter the top 5. The next films triggered bans, raids, and outrage powerful enough to reshape how the world viewed animation. At number 6 is Akira, the cyberpunk landmark that changed global animation forever. Directed by Katsuhiro Otomo and produced with an unprecedented 1.1 billion yen budget, around $9 million, it brought together 700 artists to create 160,000 hand-painted frames. The film is set in Neo-Tokyo, a city rebuilt after nuclear devastation and drowning in political corruption, biker wars, and psychic terror. Its narrative follows Tetsuo, a young delinquent whose psychic awakening triggers mass destruction that reshapes his world. The scale of the violence and the grotesque body transformations led to bans or heavy edits in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and several Gulf nations. Censors classified it as morally corrosive and excessively graphic. Despite restrictions, Akira earned $49 million worldwide and became the first Japanese animated feature to receive wide U.S. theatrical distribution. Critics hailed it as a visual breakthrough, and audiences viewed it as a cinematic revolution. Time magazine placed it among the top 25 animated films ever made. Akira set the blueprint for the anime industry's international rise, influencing filmmakers, musicians, and designers who recognized its precision, energy, and prophetic vision of urban collapse. Coming in at number 5, we have Urotsukidoji, Legend of the Overfiend, the film that unleashed one of the most infamous genres in animation history. Directed by Hideki Takayama and based on Toshio Maida's erotic horror manga, it was produced for about $800,000 and released in Japan at the tail end of the 1980s boom in direct-to-video animation. The story fuses apocalyptic mythology with grotesque eroticism, portraying a demonic world colliding with human civilization through scenes that stunned even veteran audiences. The UK invoked the 1984 Video Recordings Act to ban it outright, while Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and parts of Canada followed. In 1992, London police raided video shops and seized thousands of copies under obscenity laws, and distributors were fined for selling what authorities labeled animated pornography. Despite the restrictions, underground circulation exploded. By 1995, more than 700,000 illegal VHS copies had been sold globally. The film's reputation grew beyond censorship debates, defining the tentacle horror subgenre and influencing decades of extreme anime. For better or worse, Urotsukidoji became the boundary marker for how far Japanese animation could go before the world pushed back. At number 4 is Grave of the Fireflies, the Studio Ghibli production that proved emotional devastation could be as controversial as graphic violence. Directed by Isao Takahata and released alongside My Neighbor Totoro in 1988, it told the story of Seita and Setsuko, siblings struggling to survive after the firebombing of Kobe during World War II. The film was animated with painful realism, showing starvation, despair, and the slow erosion of hope in a war-torn Japan. The budget of 360 million yen produced some of Ghibli's most haunting imagery: candles flickering in ruins, shadows of planes sweeping across burning cities. Broadcasters in Japan refused regular airings until 1993, calling it emotionally unsuitable for minors. And several school boards banned public screenings. Despite its limited run, it grossed around 400 million yen and won Japan's Blue Ribbon Award for Best Film. International critics praised it as one of the most profound war movies ever made, with Roger Ebert declaring it essential viewing. Researchers later used the film in trauma studies and therapy programs for its unflinching portrayal of grief. Grave of the Fireflies stands as one of animation's most painful triumphs. Taking the number 3 spot is Barefoot Gen, an adaptation of Keiji Nakazawa's autobiographical manga that confronted Japan's wartime legacy with raw honesty. Produced by Madhouse Studios on a 200 million yen budget, it depicted Hiroshima's atomic bombing through the eyes of a young boy, Jin, whose family experiences the blast firsthand. The film's depictions of human combustion, melting skin, and radiation sickness shocked audiences worldwide. In 2013, decades after its release, schools in Matsue City, Japan, temporarily banned the film and manga for being anti-national. Earlier, certain libraries in South Korea and the United States had restricted access due to its disturbing visuals. Yet, it was celebrated at the 1983 Moscow Film Festival, receiving a standing ovation. Critics viewed it as a landmark in historical storytelling, balancing factual horror with artistic sincerity. UNESCO later listed it as an essential cultural text for peace education. Barefoot Gen remains a cornerstone of anti-nuclear cinema, remembered not for propaganda, but for exposing the human cost of war with unfiltered precision. At number 2, we enter Wicked City, Yoshiaki Kawajiri's nightmarish vision of demons, espionage, and seduction. Produced by Madhouse Studios with a 500 million yen budget, it merged noir aesthetics with supernatural horror, creating a world where interdimensional peace depends on assassins and shape-shifting monsters. The film's explicit sexual violence and graphic transformations drew immediate bans in Singapore and Norway and heavy edits in the United Kingdom and Germany. The 1992 US release carried an NC-17 rating, a rarity for anime. Critics compared it to David Cronenberg's body horror, praising its atmosphere but warning viewers about its brutality. Despite, or because of, its censorship battles, Wicked City built a cult audience in Europe and North America, inspiring later cyber-noir works such as Ghost in the Shell, Vampire Hunter D, Bloodlust, and even The Matrix. Quentin Tarantino once described it as a perfect animated nightmare. Its fusion of eroticism, violence, and political paranoia made it one of the most polarizing animated features of the decade. And finally, at number 1, stands The Plague Dogs, a film so realistic that audiences believed real animals were used. Directed by Martin Rosen and adapted from Richard Adams' novel, it was produced by Nepenthes Productions on a £1.5 million budget. The story follows two laboratory dogs escaping a government research facility, only to face starvation, drowning, and persecution. The hand-drawn animation portrayed animal suffering with such authenticity that several European countries, including Germany, Sweden, and Finland, banned it from theatrical release. The BBC refused to broadcast it until 2002, citing its graphic realism. The Guardian described it as a howl of moral despair. The 103-minute uncut version, restored decades later, revealed sequences that were once too distressing for distribution. The film grossed just £250,000, but developed a lasting academic presence, studied in ethics and animal rights programs for its uncompromising message. The Plague Dogs remains one of the darkest achievements in animation, a story that replaced fantasy with anguish and redefined what animated storytelling could endure. These banned animations proved that cartoons could challenge power, shock nations, and survive censorship. Subscribe now for more hidden chapters from cinema's most fearless decade.